Hello class, welcome to my week 8 discussion on institutional and community treatment. In my initial post, I just kind of cover what both of them are. I'm just going to briefly read that real quick. The juvenile justice system entails two options when dealing with a youth offender: imposing an institutional or community ramification. The use of a community treatment ensures the youth's effort will receive appropriate care, protection, and participation in treatment services such as mental health rehabilitation, which is geared for individual or group therapy. And that aims to resolve why the juvenile is committing delinquent acts. The juvenile court's legal alternative to incarceration under the community treatment approach is probation, restitution, and other necessary community programs to curb problematic behavior. This could entail court-ordered work programs. The umbrella effect of a community treatment utilizes privately owned residents to provide shelter to the youth. This includes foster care, group homes, boarding schools, if the environment is safe, or allowing the juvenile to remain at home during their adjudication or to fulfill their probation period. Community treatment supporters believe that by combining community and court accountability, this approach is most effective, least harmful to the juvenile, and promotes more lawful behavior. They believe that community involvement and being accountable through, let's say, society members' social standards will render more of a law-abiding child instead of being put in right away restrictive environment. Okay, so institutional treatment refers to the opposite approach, which emphasizes the need to control deviant behavior through suppression. Institutional treatment imposes a youth sentence to a treatment facility. This can be a correctional center that adopts the philosophy of restriction to mitigate future juvenile recidivism. I just want to touch that real quickly because institutional treatment can be correctional centers such as going to detention hall for the juvenile or being sentenced to juvie. That's not always the approach that the juvenile justice system takes. I'm going to further explain here. Institutional treatment entails the use of drug treatment, long-term participation in secured training schools, reformatory ranches, also forestry camps and boot camps. So these are also kind of alternative to incarceration, for example, boot camp, but very secure, tough, get tough mentality to address the problems, kind of shake the juvenile out of their deviant behavior patterns. Also, you got forestry camps, which is great because it takes the child out of, like, say, inner city and puts them in the country, and then they'll learn survival skills, nature, anything that will positively, in fact, impact the youth. Proponents of institutional treatment believe that youth must be exposed to consequences by undergoing prison-like or restrictive therapy from the state to deter future illegal behavior. The opponents of institutional treatment claims that it will label and is not a conducive option for problematic youths because it will reinforce their adoption of a social filter that says they are troublemakers. This week's discussion is about Pat, a 13-year-old girl who has committed an armed robbery that held a woman at knife point so she can take her purse. Pat is not a first-time offender and has been arrested for shoplifting and possession of narcotics. This has subsequently led to her court-ordered probation. Suppose I assume the role of a juvenile court judge, I would ask the following questions. Number one, does Pat have any current psychological problems stemming from mental health disorders, such as intermittent explosive disorder, which increases aggressive behaviors? Secondly, what is Pat's home or school environment? Is she around any negative influences for her to engage in illegal behaviors from the family, peers? What's kind of going on around her social nucleus? And also, I would want to know, How did Pat commit this crime while serving a probation sentence? Who left her unsupervised? Normally, she's held accountable by a probation officer. Now, I don't know the terms of her probation sentence. However, that's a big aspect I would want to know. How did she purchase the knife, picked up the knife, and run around the city and held a woman at knife point? Furthermore, the community treatment reflects that the probation approach will interfere with harmful complications to community reintegration because of increased individual liberty by being able to be accountable to authoritative figures such as a probation officer. Now, that's the community treatment approach. However, this approach has not worked for Pat. After reviewing the case, the youth has aggressively increased her criminal career, now to the point of committing an armed robbery with a weapon that could lead to homicide if the situation escalated, if the victim chose to fight back, and rightfully so, it's justified to use self-defense against Pat. This can be a bad situation. I propose that community treatment is helpful to mitigate problematic behaviors. However, Pat must receive more restrictive handling. Her inappropriate behavior has increased, and she is now threatening society members. There is no excuse to propagate fear by wielding a dangerous weapon. Perhaps the victim has incurred psychological damage from this event. Nevertheless, I would not suggest a prison-like environment, which would just worsen her criminal exposure to deviant behavior. I would sentence her to a secured drug treatment if the court found that this was an aggravating factor into her legal acts. I would propose the use of ranch camps, which will allow her to be removed from her environment where she is used to violence. She would learn discipline through hard work, compassion for animals and humans, and respect for authority. This would seem to be the better institutional treatment option to deter Pat from more acts of criminality. And that would conclude my Week 8 discussion. I'm excited to communicate with my peers and with Dr. Reese. It's been a pleasure reading and corresponding with each of my classmates and with my Dr. Reese over the last 8 weeks. I hope the very best to each of you, your academic endeavors, and I'll see you in discussion boards.